I am with Teach 'em Chuck. We're going to be talking about the Israel and Palestinian war. What's the history? What is the real history about this war? You guys might be saying like, oh my gosh, Keisha, why do you keep talking about this? I'm talking about this because it's a topic that's really important. It's important biblically. It's important historically. And I'm kind of a nerd. I'm just interested just in general. And with the help of Chuck, what I've learned about the connection with the Soviet Union has just blew my mind, as he so often does. It's really, really honored to have you back on the Keisha King Show, and teaching us about this conflict in a more in-depth way, because I know a lot of the things that we hear and see about it is just kind of surface level. So, where does the conflict start? Let's just start from the beginning.
I would say in the 17th century down through the 18th, 19th, you had these various false messiahs, as they called them, rising amongst the Jewish people, saying that, perhaps it is time for us to return to our native land, in droves, and to, establish a homeland, a political territory. So that way we may be, better protected from, discrimination and, these various pogroms and these kinds of things.
Protected from being killed.
Right. And right. And so the question, it became amongst many of folk, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, as far as Jewish, identity, culture, and so on and so forth is concerned, how best or what is the best course of action for the Jewish people, considering the fact that they don't necessarily have a state to call their own, ever since, and this is a time in history where many of people point to, which is, of course, the Bar, and I hope I'm pronouncing that as best I can, the Bar Kokhba revolt in Rome in 130, 130? I think it began in 132 AD, and I think the Jewish people were finally expelled somewhere around 134, 135 AD. This was a revolt on behalf of the Jewish people, led by the then perceived Messiah of the Jewish people, a man by the name of Simon Bar Kokhba. Has it's a moniker. I think it means son of the star. What you had was, or what the Jewish people were confronting, was this encroachment, at least that's the way they perceived it, of this kind of pagan or non Judaic influence on Judea. And you had the Emperor Hadrian of Rome at the time, who was trying to, I guess you can say, Hellenize or paganize Jerusalem. And they were beginning to, erect these pagan sort of idols and statues and things of that nature to their god, and it was all sorts of things. And mind you, it's a lot of history, right? We can unpack. The Roman authorities were, outlawing. I think they outlawed circumcision and just all sorts of things that were insults to Jewish customs. And so, of course, once the revolt, the Jewish revolt against the Roman Empire was, put down, and this is during the period in time where that particular region of the Roman Empire was renamed Philistine or Palestine, after the Philistine people of the Bible. And the story goes that, of course, this was meant to sort of mock the Jews for their defeat and the trouncing of their revolt against Emperor Hadrian. Now, from that point forward, people say, well, the Jewish people just they were dispersed, and from that point forward, they were really a people without a land. But that's not entirely true, considering the fact that even from that point, Jews have always inhabited the land of Palestine. As a matter of fact, just to sort of cut to the chase when it comes to a lot of the propaganda you hear about Jews stealing the land from the Palestinians, the reality is that they didn't steal land, they merely purchased land that was unoccupied. This notion that, you know, the Jews left the land and came back in the 20th century isn't entirely true, but there was virtually very little people there, very few people there in general, but there were people there of all sorts of religious stripes, from, of course, Jew, Muslim, and Christian. But that particular region of what we call Palestine today underwent many of different, jurisdictional changes, from, of course, the Eastern Romans, or what we call the Byzantians, and then fast forward to the conquering of Jerusalem by Caliph
Would
Omar.
that be like the Byzantines?
Byzantine, yeah.
Okay.
Byzantine Empire. I mean, that is where you can pretty much find the seat of Christendom, quite frankly. Was probably the most powerful region of Christian thought and Christian influence in Eastern Rome, and it established one of the earliest known Christian churches in the world, and that, of course, is the Church of Hagia Sophia in what is today modern day Istanbul. At the time, of course, it was called Constantinople. But the Byzantine Empire was, I think they were officially ran out of Jerusalem sometime during the 7th century under the at the point of a sword by a man by the name of Caliph Omar. Now, I don't know. Again, it's sort of weird because, when you hear these names, when you hear these names, sometimes, they're titles as well as names. So it's a bit difficult because, with Caliph Omar conquering Jerusalem in the 7th century, that's when, that particular region of the world that we today refer to as Palestine sort of became, I guess, Islamized. But not for lack of a better term. That's quite frankly what happened. And so you kind of saw this ongoing sort of territorial thing happening between the Mohammedans, or the Seljukian Turks, and the Eastern Romans of Byzantium. And this, again, this went on back and forth for centuries. And so this whole thing about a Palestinian people, there is no Palestinian Arab unique onto himself. There were Muslim Arabs, as point of fact. There was a time when the Arab peoples rejected the term Palestinian outright. You see, this is another part of history that people don't get taught, because prior to the 1960s, when they began to embrace the term Palestinian, of course, at the behest of the Soviet KGB, they rejected the term Palestinian because, get this now, this is the kicker, that the Arab authorities all over the world, quite frankly, view the term Palestinian as a term that exclusively designated a Jew, not an Arab Muslim. A Palestinian was a Jew, not an Arab Muslim.
Okay.
The peoples that we call, I guess you can call them Palestinian refugees, the people of Gaza, or wherever, I guess they sort of find themselves under Israeli occupation, or whatever the propagandistic terms they throw around. These peoples considered themselves to be citizens of either Syria or what was at the time called Transjordan. Around the time of the fall of the Ottoman Empire, you had groups of Arabs in the region that they comprised themselves of, or they created these groups comprised of both Christian Arabs and Muslim Arabs that they referred to as the Christian Muslim Association. You can look that up. And the Christian Muslim Association was petitioning the country of Syria to either become part of Syria or to have part of what was, I guess, carved out to sort of make up this new Jewish homeland called Palestine. They wanted a certain part of that particular region to be siphoned off, and so that they can create their own state that they called Southern Syria. So the Palestinians of today consider themselves to be citizens of Syria or citizens of Transjordan. Well, the conflict isn't between Israel and Palestine. The conflict is between the state of Israel and the entirety of the Arab Muslim world, because the anti-Israeli or anti-Zionist perspective or attitude is not one held by those who consider themselves to be Palestinian. This is an attitude that is held by all of the Muslim world, because the wars against the state of Israel were not being waged by Palestinians. They were being waged by Egyptians, Lebanese, Syrians, Jordanians, Iraqis, and so on and so forth. Primarily Egyptians, I guess, part and parcel of the of Islamic culture, because there is no state authority that any believer, as they call themselves, there is no authority that they are bound to abide by, if in fact that governing authority is that of someone who is in fact a non-believer. They have a theological commitment to overthrow the authority of the non-Muslim wherever they see him. Matter of fact, I mean, this is again part and parcel of the caliphate movement. You see, the term caliph, and it simply means someone who is considered to be the successor of Muhammad. And Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, is also referred to as the great example. He is the example by which all Muslims are to live. And so when you're talking about who is the caliph represents all that which is Islam. So at the time of the reign of the Ottoman Empire was seen as the caliph, which means that the Turkish Empire was the representative entity, and the conglomerate of its sultans were seen as the caliph of Islam. Now, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, you had what was called the Caliph movement that sprung up in India, and you had Muslim Indians that were trying to maintain Turkish authority as the so-called Caliph of Islam. And the Caliph movement in Muslim India was also this sort of anti-British colonial movement, which is why the Caliph movement in the late 1910s, early 1920s aligned itself with the Indian independence movement that was led by Mahatma Gandhi. So you had this socialist in Mahatma Gandhi coupled with the Caliph movement that was trying to maintain the influence of the Turkish Empire as this sort of rebuke of the sort of influence of the British Empire. But you also had at the time the British Empire playing both sides, because it was the British Empire that sort of like encouraged this rebellion amongst Arab Muslims against Turkish Muslims, because the Arabian Muslims wanted to have their own separate identity apart from that of the Turks. A lot of conservatives get confused, and you know you hear this term. People talk a lot about how, for example, the quote-unquote Zionist lobby has captured American foreign policy. But nothing could be further from the truth. The reality is that this whole Zionism project it is fair to say, and this is to your point, Keisha, that it has never been the majority opinion of British authorities or even dispersed Jews throughout the world themselves. This whole uh, notion of sort of repatriating back to the land of Judea, of their ancestry, even at the time when it became this sort of, you know, this was sort of like all the rage amongst a lot of leading intellectuals and politicians in the 19th century. Many Jewish people did not support it. Not only that, but many within the British government themselves did not support it. Because you see, at the time in the 19th century, you had this sort of a crusade, because the British Empire sort of saw itself as being this sort of the moral exemplar of the world, because
Mm-hmm.
not only did it see itself as leading the way in terms of, for example, ridding the world of slavery, which of course the Arab Muslim world was vehemently opposed to. But they also, with the British, there was a British dignitary of some sort. I forgot what his title was, and I forgot his name. And of course, I don't have time to look it up right now. But I think sometime during the 1800s, I think he approached the then ruler of Zanzibar, asking him, you know, as part of, I guess, their trade deal, if they would consider, you know, ending slavery. And that the then king of Zanzibar, at the time, forget his name, he said to the British, quite frankly, that, okay, sounds good. But he said that in so many words, that my people are not like you. My people don't read like you. My people aren't literate like you. If I abolish slavery, he's pretty much told them, you're asking me to kneecap my own political power, because if I abolish slavery, my people will revolt against me. There were instances
Wow.
and times throughout the Muslim world where they did try to abolish slavery. And when they did, the people rose up and overthrew them. Because you have to understand that, and I hate to use this term fundamentalist
Mm-hmm.
interpretation, but I'll put that qualifier out there to spare some feelings. The fundamentalist interpretation of Islam suggests that not only is the Muslim to rule over the other peoples of the book in the afterlife, he is also to rule over him here. And it is to the extent that the Muslim world is not atop the heap as far as international hegemony is concerned, is the fault of the Muslim insofar as he has allowed himself to be corrupted by the influences of Western culture. The British Empire in the 1800s saw itself as leading the world in the abolition of slavery, but it also saw itself as trying to sort of fix or cure, remedy the issue of anti-Semitism. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
know it's one of those things, one of those words we hear, because again, it gets very nuanced and it gets very complex, because all things that are considered anti-Semitic is not anti-Semitic. But
Right.
this was in fact a popular refrain of the communists in the 20th century to deflect themselves from criticism, to protect
Mm-hmm.
themselves from those seeking to criticize them for their subversive activities,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of them were, in fact, Jewish. But
Mm-hmm.
there was a great deal of anti-Semitism the world over, for various reasons. For, again, you know, for their refusal to assimilate. But the whole goal of the push for Zionism was not led solely by Jews, but it was led, some would say, primarily by Christians in Great Britain, who saw themselves as what the term is called, millenarians. I don't know if you ever heard this term. I think I'm
No.
pronouncing it correctly. These were millenarian Christians. It is a type of, I guess you can fair to say, a type of theological interpretation that suggests that there would be these, you know, great blessing. I guess it would bring forth the second coming of God, once the state of Israel was established and the Jewish kingdom, the Jewish land of Israel, was kind of reconsecrated, this was
Mhm.
supposed to bring forth the second coming of the Christ. You even had some Christian theologians at the time, particularly in the British Empire, and even in the French Empire, because they were, you know, involved in much of this as well. Yeah, and that's what was, going back to the point that I made about the Christian Muslim Association. It wasn't Syria they went to; they went to the French, I believe it was, to try and get the French to aid them in their quest to establish a state of southern Syria. But anyway, going back to my point, you
Mhm.
had some Christian theologians at the time who, given the current state of the region of Palestine, how desolate and barren it was, they viewed the condition of Palestine as being a symbol of the end times. So you had some Christian theologians in the 19th century who believed that the end times were upon us because of the current state of Palestine. And then you had others that
Hmm.
thought that, well, the end times would come about once we reestablished a state, a homeland for the Jewish people, again, which was not, of course, called Israel at the time. It was still considered Palestine, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, and on the flip side of that, you know, of course, Muslims see the coming forth or the commencing of the end times when, in fact, they have slain every Jew. This whole free Palestine, freedom for Palestine, there's just a part of this whole critical liberation
Mhm.
kit and caboodle, and
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
it's all sort of fused together as a means to sort of perpetuate this narrative that the not I mean they use this term colonialism and imperialism and what have you, but what they are really talking about is what these leftists are attempting to do is they're trying to delegitimize the positive aspects of empire building, because
Mhm.
notice they're not against the empire that was the Turkish Empire, right? Or
Mhm.
any other sort of sort of smaller Muslim empire, and we'll get into all of that stuff. They're not necessarily against that, but what they are against is that they are against the authority of the British Empire, for example, and this is all a part of their Marxian propaganda. This is why they believe
Yes.
what they believe when it comes to the state of Israel being sort of like this colonial oppressor and this, that, and the third that's oppressing and
Mhm.
trying to keep down the peoples of
Mhm.
Palestine. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Palestinians and much of the Arab world, for that matter, they get their propaganda, their tools of propaganda. They either get it from the you know, the hadith. They either get it from the examples of Muhammad, or quite frankly they get it by way of their Soviet trained leaders who are experts in
Okay.
communist propaganda. The Palestinian, it is almost an abstract concept that is being used as a kind of springboard so that the competing civilization, and that is the Arab Muslim civilization, can wage its war against the West. And when I
Mhm.
say the West, I'm talking about all non-believers. This whole thing about a Palestine, again, it is simply used as a propaganda tool in order to gain sympathy
Mhm.
from the world's peoples who are led around by their nose, thanks to the intelligentsia. And the
Mhm.
intelligentsia, of course, transcends all national borders, because you had the influence of a very destructive intelligentsia in Europe in the early 20th century that began the practice of appeasement when it came to the Muslim world, going all the way back to a man who you've probably heard of by the name of Amin al-Husseini. Yeah, about walking in Palestine,
Yes.
soaked in blood. I think you're talking about the former president of Egypt, President, I know his last name is
Oh, nah.
Nasser. Just wanted
Okay.
to just mention Husseini briefly. Of course, he was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, what's the, hold on, wait, because I actually have the guy's name jotted down here because I didn't want to forget it. And so when, before, Israel became a state, thanks to the UN resolution 181, you already began to see Jews moving back to Palestine after various pogroms across, Eastern Europe, Russia, and so on and so forth. And what you had, and this was you can look up something called the Herb Simpson report. The Herb Simpson report talked about how the lives of Arab Muslims in the region of Palestine began to increase. Their wealth increased. The value of their property increased when the Jews came in. They began to multiply.
I read this, yeah.
Their populations increased in areas and in cities that were majority Muslim, began to lose population. And the provinces that were these new Jewish settlements, they began to gain population. So the Arabs began to flee their lands to live alongside the Jews, because along with the Jews came a better way of life. People have this, even a lot of, I'm ashamed to even call some of them conservatives, because I consider myself to be one. You hear a lot of these folk prattling, going on and on and on, trying to suggest that there's some sort of vast international Jewish conspiracy to dominate the world, and that's just complete and utter nonsense. But again, we'll go back to that. I just wanted to just kind of prove this point real quick about the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. The lives of the Palestinian people, and this was in fact, I'm putting it all together.
Okay.
This was, of course, predicted by the man who, it's kind of difficult. Well, I wouldn't say necessarily difficult, but I guess I was going to say it's kind of difficult to put your finger on who exactly is, I guess, the sort of father of Zionism. But a man who, I don't think it's difficult. I think that people can throw some names out there and they could probably find the bullseye. But a man, when you study the proliferation of Zionism, you're bound to run across the name Theodore Herzl. I don't know if you heard the name Theodore Herzl in his book, in his 1896 book titled The Jewish State. It was Theodore Herzl who commenced the first Zionist Congress in Switzerland the following year in 1897. Theodore Herzl, he predicted that there wouldn't be, naively, that there wouldn't be much tension between the Arab and the Jew, considering the fact that the Arab would see a vast increase in his livelihood simply if he lived amongst the Jew, because everywhere Jewish people went, not only did they themselves tend to prosper, but they tended to make those around them wealthier as well. When we know this, we saw this, for example, with the then Empress of Russia, the infamous Catherine the Great, I think was the title that she had, but Empress Catherine, she was one time ruler of Russia in the 18th century. She put out an edict at one point summoning all Jews around the world to repatriate to Russia. Why? Because at the time, Russia was going through intense financial struggles, and Catherine the Great thought that simply by bringing more Jews to Russia, she could increase the wealth of the country.
Wow.
And eventually it worked. But guess what happened? Once it came to pass, well, the natives of Russia who were non-Jewish began to resent the Russian Jew. But also,
because people tend to have jealousy over groups that are succeeding and doing better than them.
Yeah. And the same was true of the Chinese in Southeast Asia. The Chinese in Southeast Asia were called the Jews of the Southeast. Anyway,
it's a heart thing. It's a human.
It's a human thing. It's an envy thing. It's a human thing.
Yeah.
And so at around the same time that Theodore Herzl was becoming like this world-renowned figure, this world-renowned political analyst and journalist who was at the forefront of the cause for the establishment of a Jewish state, you had the mayor of Jerusalem, a man by the name of Yusuf al-Khalidi. Yusuf al-Khalidi wrote a letter to one of the leading rabbis in France, who was a anti-Zionist a Jewish French rabbi. And you can go and read the letter of Yusuf al-Khalidi, who said that, yes, this land does belong to the Jew, but he said that realistically, I see no way to have Jews, relocating to this area in massive waves to set up this state without causing intense, military, violent conflict. And so he said that, you must tell them. And when he meant them, he meant that the Jews are pretty much being led to the slaughter thanks to their friends, the fanatical Christian. And so it was understood at the time that there was a belief amongst, Muslim authorities that the fanatical Christian was sort of leading the Jew into the slaughter. And so to go all the way back to your question you talked about this whole concept of a Palestinian. The anti-Zionist attitude is a pan-Islamist movement that seeks to unite all of Islam under one banner. Sure, true enough, there are national disputes and so on and so forth amongst these various Muslim majority countries. And I'm not here to say that it's just simply just one big dog and pony show. But the fact of the matter is that they're all vying for who is going to be the quote unquote caliph or the successor of Muhammad, to be the representative of what's called the Ummah, which is the entirety of the Muslim community, because the goal is not from the river to the sea, the Mediterranean to the Jordan. It is from the ocean to the sea, because they seek to wipe us all out. And when I say that, I'm not making that up. You don't believe me, Keisha? You can do it now, or you can do it when this live is over. Yasser Arafat, the head of the Palestinian Liberation Authority, said, and I think it was in 1993, he said that we don't care about borders. I'm paraphrasing him. We don't care about the borders of Palestine or the borders of Israel. Our land is not from the river to the sea, or they say drive them out from where they drove you out. That's in the Quran. No, he said we're not talking about that. He says, and I quote, we mean to wipe out all enemies of Islam from the ocean. That's the word he uses, from the ocean to the sea. We simply use the Palestinian conflict as a rhetorical tool of propaganda to wage war against the entirety of the non-Muslim world. It's not about Israel. This is why when Israel was declared a state thanks to UN Resolution 181, they were attacked by Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. So I don't understand where we get off when we talk about, well, this is a Palestinian thing, because the Arab League, which was founded in 1945 in response to what would become the state of Israel, because for about 20 years, they could not reach any type of agreement thanks to the agitation against the Jews of Palestine, because there was no Israel. The agitation against the Jews of Palestine, led by the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was given that title by a man by the name of Herbert Samuel, who was the High Commissioner of Palestine. He was a Brit. After a 1920 sort of attack on the Jews of Palestine, was led to the death of, I forgot how many Jews in the particular region of Palestine, al-Husseini was arrested and was charged for his crimes and this and that. But what the British authority did was do exactly what the appeasers in the West do today. Well, al-Husseini has a reason to be upset. And so what we must do is give him power, give him a title, make him feel important, and he will leave the Jewish people alone. He was declared the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem by Great Britain. They gave him that title. And so for 20 years, this was going on. And once they saw, okay, this is not going to work, just give them. And then that's when it was all out war was declared at during the formation of what became known as the Arab League, which
Mhm.
original 6 charter countries was Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Transjordan, Syria, Egypt, and I'm probably forget. I'm think I'm forgetting one. But in the first meeting of the Muslim Arab League was, I think it was in 1945, 46, somewhere around there in
Mhm.
Cairo, Egypt. I give you an example, Keisha. Like, so you have the 1948 Israeli War of Independence. Of course, you had the war between Israel and Egypt over control of the Suez Canal, again, which Israel, won that war, which, gave them control over what is now the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula, which they eventually gave up. It's funny uh, because, prior to a certain time in history, you had this kind of universally accepted principle of land seizure called the right of conquest. I don't know if you ever heard that term before. And it was declared that when you win a war, you defeat your enemy. The land becomes yours.
Mhm. Mhm.
Israel is funny because the original sort of lot of land, which was, Transjordan. It was, I mean, Israel got so few of what it was promised by the British Empire. I mean, Israel is about the size of my backyard, and originally that was not the plan. And it's funny because every time Israel has sort of won a war of defense, it has been forced in the wake of quote unquote international opinion that Israel has been constantly bullied into giving back what it has rightfully can call onto itself,
Mhm.
thanks to the tried and true principle of the right of conquest, which I think it was, I'm forgetting the UN resolution, I guess, that deemed it illegal is not the right word, because there's no sort of legal jurisdiction that the UN has over any sovereign nation, especially. But yeah, they sort of abandoned this whole notion of the right of conquest, because if Israel really wanted to, I mean, you got Israel. I mean, it's Israel surrounded by Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. You got
Yes.
Iraq right there above Syria. You have Egypt
Yes.
down to it. But yeah, so you had the 1948 War of Independence. You had the preemptive invasion of Egypt on behalf of Israeli defenses, because they had it on good intel that Egypt was about to attack them again. Not only that, but Egypt was severely affecting Israel economically by not allowing commercial passage through the Suez Canal. So you had that in 48. You had in 1956 the war between Israel and Egypt. Of course, you had the Six-Day War in
Mhm.
1967, and then
Yeah.
you had the Yom Kippur War in 1973.
Oh, I don't even know about that.
And it was, I'm trying to remember, at the end of the 6-Day War in 1967, there was another meeting of the Muslim authorities all over the world, and they met, I believe it was in Sudan, which, when they came up with something that was called the Khartoum Resolution. Look up the
Mhm.
Khartoum Resolution, where they just flat out said that we need every single solitary Muslim majority country on deck. Israel has to be eliminated. And that you mean you can go and read the Khartoum Resolution in detail, but that's pretty much what they said in a nutshell. But my point, when you brought up communism, and when I talk about the Yom Kippur War, another unprovoked attack against Israel, guess what country was involved in the attack on Israel in 1973? None other than
Russia?
Cuba.
Oh,
Cuba.
Cuba. Okay.
You may
Well,
as well have said Russia, because during not because by the time I think Anwar Sadat was the president of Egypt by the time the Yom Kippur War kicked off, if I'm not mistaken. But in the 1956 war over the control over the Sinai, President Nasser was leading Egypt, and President Nasser was being supported and was being armed by the Soviet Union. You
Wow.
fast forward to 1963, the Palestinian people as a separate peoples apart from Arab Muslims of Jordan and Syria and elsewhere, they were given their own unique identity thanks to the propagandists at the KGB. And they used one of their #1 Muslim Arab lapdogs, the now infamous Yasser Arafat, and
Mm.
tried to forge his birth records to suggest that he was born in Palestine when he was really born in Cairo.
What?
So yeah, so Yasser,
That is
so
so crazy.
so Yasser Arafat became the first head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And so he sort of became like the figurehead of this new sort of Palestinian identity. Mind you, when you're talking about Palestine, keep in mind now, Arab Muslims going back to the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, to call an Arab Muslim in the Middle East a Palestinian was an insult. They rejected the term because a Palestinian was a Jew in their minds, right?
Mhm. Mm.
Now, ask yourself this question. When people say, man, where's this Palestine? Well, they said, well, Israel wasn't invented until 1948. We said, well, Palestine wasn't invented until somewhere around 1963. Here's where the Palestinian Liberation Organization propagandists can't come in at. Because remember when you showed me that tweet or whatever it was with Dave Rubin,
Yeah.
responding to some. So now what the Palestinian Liberation Organization has taken the same, because mind you, Palestine has never had a president. It has never had a king, a
Mm.
monarch. It has no history whatsoever apart from any other folk, Arabs in the region. They now suggest, guess who they say? First Palestinian they claim was Jesus Christ. Put out statements praising Jesus, talking about, peace be upon him and the great martyr for the cause of Palestine. Mind you, just like the liberation theologians of the secular left use Christianity. Notice how they sort of Marxified Catholicism with
Yeah.
liberation theology in Southern and Central America,
Mhm.
and they brought it to the States. Well, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, like the liberation theologians of the West, of the heretical Western, quote unquote, Christian or Catholic tradition, have taken Jesus Christ and turned him into a political martyr for the cause of the freedom of Palestine. Because Jesus Christ, as the first, this is how propaganda works. Jesus Christ, as the first Palestinian, was persecuted for his political belief, not because of his heresy for claiming that he was the Son of God. No, they turned Jesus Christ into a political martyr for the cause of the Palestinian people. So Jesus Christ was the first Palestinian. But if this deep how their propaganda works now, what the anti-war movement in the 1930s was about the same stuff that it was in the 1960s and 70s. Its sole purpose was to aid in the proliferation of Soviet expansion,
Mm.
because at the time, this was in the wake of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Stalin and Adolf Hitler. The communists in the United States were supporting Adolf Hitler. They did not want the United States getting involved in World War II, because they did not want the United States putting a stop to Hitler's imperial machine. And part of this whole anti-war coalition was a band of progressive Christians and preachers,
Mm.
some of whom were fellow travelers to the Soviet Union, some of whom were active members of the ACLU. This is the famous quote, and this is one of the famed quotes of all the Muslim Brotherhood, every radical faction of the whole of the Islamic movement. And you may have heard it before, but I'm just going to quote it for those who may not have heard it. Of course, this is the famous hadith spoken by Muhammad that goes as such: Judgment day will not come until the Muslims fight the Jews. The Jews will hide behind the stones and the trees, and the stones and the trees will say, O Muslim, O servant of Allah, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him. You've had at various times Mahmoud Abbas, Yasser Arafat, all of whom have cited this hadith at one time or another. There is a Jew behind me. Come and kill him.
To say thank you guys so much for watching. We will see you next time. We're going to come back with a part 2. Bye-bye.